Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andy. I hope you're doing really well wherever or whenever in the world that you are. Today we're gonna be doing a fun video. We're gonna be talking all about bookish icks. Now I've seen a ton of short form content about this and I really enjoy it. So I figured I would join the fad and talk about some of the tropes or characteristics or things that come up in books that just really turn me off. They're either things that make me want to DNF, they inevitably lead to me DNFing or putting a book down. Maybe it just takes away from my over enjoyment of a book or of a story. Yeah, they're just things that drive me a little bit bananas. Now, I do just want to say, if you enjoy any of these things, I love that for you. Like this is not serious. Really, everything is just personal opinion. So, please continue to enjoy any or all of these things if they're your jam. I would love to know though, if any of these are also your bookish icks, let me know in the comments below, especially if you think of other books that have these like tropes or characteristics in them. Or if you have different bookish icks, I would love to hear about them. I feel like I was talking about this with some of my friends at work and we had such a funny conversation. So I'd love to continue that in the comments. All right, my first bookish ick is kind of a classic romance trope, but that is insta love. I don't like it. It feels so fake. I never end up believing in the chemistry because I'm just like, oh, you saw them and they're hot and so you're in love with them. It feels so unrealistic to me that I always end up just kind of rolling my eyes or just not fully buying into the romance dynamic. It's so surface level. It feels kind of lazy to me sometimes, like, oh, we're just supposed to get that they're into each other because they met for 1 second. I don't know. It's not my favorite thing. Some books that come to mind that had this bad that I've read like in the near distant past, Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon. The romance kind of at the center of this historical fiction felt very insta-lovey to me and very unsatisfying. As you get to know the characters throughout the rest of the book, like I cared about them more, but I still felt pretty lukewarm about their romance as a whole. Another one that I don't remember too much about the specifics, but I just kind of remember it leaving me the impression that I didn't love the insta-love vibe was Dark Lover by J.R. Ward. I feel like I just read this first book and I was kind of like, meh, not for me. And the couple's relationship felt very insta-lovey. I know that there's like a gazillion examples of insta-love. It's not a trope that I like, so I don't tend to read it very often. So when it comes up in books that I've selected, I'm always really disappointed when I see it. My next bookish ick is impulsivity. I really struggle with this, especially with young protagonists. I think I've said this in previous videos. I definitely have. I really appreciate a protagonist who is very thoughtful and clever and insightful and like thinks many steps ahead. That's something that I look for in protagonists. So naturally, the opposite really frustrates me. And I also feel very bamboozled when a character is pitched as being like really cunning and smart, but then their actions in the book tell a very different story. Some iconic books that come to mind where this is a thing. Poppy from the Blood and Ash series drives me up a wall. She is so frustrating to me. She does so many things without thinking, asking, communicating. I just can't stand it. And I know you can make the argument that it's an interesting character arc to watch someone who starts as this kind of impetuous, impulsive, immature kid, teenager, and like watch them grow into a more thoughtful leader, a more thoughtful protagonist. But sometimes I get so aggravated with the early stages of that character arc, I can't even continue on. Another book that I read recently with a really impulsive main lead was from Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. The main character in that story, Freya, was really annoying to me. I ended up liking the book, but I think I liked it less because this ick was in there. Another couple of series where I feel like we're told a main protagonist is like so cunning and so savvy and so smart and all of these things, but then their actions make you be like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? Fourth Wing, I feel like, was a series where she's described to us as being like so amazing, and then she does things that I'm like, are you though? Are you? I don't know. Another one that I read years ago, but I remember having the same experience was, oh my God, the main girl from The Cruel Prince. I'm forgetting her name. I blocked it out. It was so aggravating and annoying. Oh my God, what was her name? Jude. Jude from The Cruel Prince also felt like a character who I felt like I was told one thing and then I got the impression that she was very different. So anyways, okay, another bookish ick that I have that is like deep in my soul. I cannot stand repetitive pet names, bits, character descriptions, like things that I feel like I've read 100 times. I'm like, why are you telling me the same thing over and over and over again? Why is this character calling this other person the same pet name, like witty pet name, thinking they're being all clever and charming and cute, when really it gets old. It gets so old. Now, the first book that comes to mind that does a lot of this is Lady of Darkness by Melissa whatever. The pet names that the male main love interest has for the female main character are just so stupid. Like, one, he calls her Love, because I think the narrator was British, but it was just overdone. It was so much overkill. I like felt a physical sensation of like nausea in my body, and like followed by rage. It drove me nuts. His other pet name for her was Sea Star, and I think it was supposed to be cute and unique, but it was stupid. I hated it so much. Another book, I was like reading through all my reading lists that I've saved over the last few years, and another book where I don't think I've heard a lot of people talk about this, but Powerless by Elsie Silver also felt like it had a lot of repetitive elements to me. And one of them that like really grinded my gears was this mantra of what would Bo do? It got used over and over and over again. I was like, I get it. Like, enough. I also feel like Sarah J. Maas books in general do a lot of this. Like, characters will kind of rehash the same inside joke or the same bit, or they'll kind of reference a conversation that's already been had, or vocabulary words get used over and over and over again. Verbs get used over and over and over again. Like, my sister and I were talking recently because she's kind of caught up on all the Sarah J. Maas books. And she was telling me that she had never thought of or really heard the word undulating before until she read Sarah J. Maas's books. And then it's like on every other page, it feels like. And so I feel like she's an author who does this a lot. And even though I enjoy some of her books, this ick does get under my skin. You know what? Another series that comes to mind is by Scarlett St. Clair, the Hades and Persephone series. I actually really enjoy that, but the spin-off series that's like just from Hades' perspective is so repetitive and unnecessary. I only think I read the first book from the Hades saga, but it is literally verbatim like book one, just from his point of view. That kind of book bothers me. Like, sometimes it feels really purposeful and it gives a really unique perspective to a storyline, and other times, if it's not done well, it just feels like this could have been one chapter in the other book, like, or just make that other book multi-POV. It drives me nuts. I hate that redundancy. I hate when I'm feeling like I'm reading the same thing over and over again, and not in a tropey way, just like in a little vocabulary words used, or like scenes have been copied and pasted from one chapter to the next or one book to the next. Drives me nuts. Because I'm an audiobook stan, I listen to most books. That's my preferred, method of consuming story. I am very particular about audiobook narrators. And so for me, a bookish ick can be the audiobook narrator, and specifically when either I can hear them breathing in the background, like they have a lot of dramatic breaths. I find it really distracting from the story, or when they're differentiated character voices are not good. Either they don't sound distinct enough, or if it's a dual POV or multi-POV story, the other narrators haven't communicated enough around how character voices sound. It can be really distracting if one narrator reads a character's voice very differently than another narrator reads the same character in the same book. I mentioned this in Where the Lost Wander, like the female and male audiobook narrators, they're reading dialogue from the same characters, but it felt so different, like cadence, rhythm, accent, tone, everything felt different. So it really took you out of the story. This is like kind of a hard one to explain, I feel like, without having like audio clips available, and I don't think I can do that for copyright reasons. But another book that comes to mind is One Night on the Island by, oh my God, who was that by? Josie Silver. So in this book, one of the characters is American and one of the characters is British, is English. So you had a British narrator and an American narrator, but it was weird because the British narrator, when they were reading lines from the American character, would not use an American accent. That was very confusing. And then the American narrator would not use a British accent for the British character. And so it just was so distracting. It really took me out of the story because I'm like, wait, what's happening here? Like, this is not what's written in this story. And so little things like that just drive me nuts. And I think that's why audiobooks are hard for people sometimes, because if a narrator doesn't capture how you think a character sounds, whether it's the accent, I don't know, like their tone and intonation and rhythm and like all of those things, it can really take you out of a story and it can really change and impact your overall enjoyment. There are many books that I feel like in some instances, the audiobook experience, like the narrators, elevate my reading experience, especially when there's like a whole cast, or just if I'm listening to some of my favorite audiobook narrators. But there are certainly times where I feel like the narrator could detract from my overall enjoyment. When I first read the Crowns of Nyaxia series by Carissa Broadbent, I read it on my Kindle, and I actually enjoyed the story more when I was reading it physically than when I listened to it again using the audio version. And it was not, the narrator was perfectly fine, but it just didn't quite do it for me. But that's a good example of what I mean, is like, if the narrator isn't just right, it can really impact your enjoyment of a story. Another one, as I'm just like reflecting on audiobooks and narrators that I've really struggled with, I can't think of this series name, but it's by Stacey Reed. It's a historical romance series. The third book in that series, I think it's called A Scoundrel of Her Own. The audiobook narrator, was so hard for me. What do I want to say? Her performance was not my favorite, and I think I ended up giving that book like 2 stars. Like, the way that she was performing the female character, especially, oh, sorry, I just knocked my camera. The female character specifically, it was so annoying. I remember it being too high pitched. And that's a series that I loved, the first 2 books. And because I didn't like the narrator's performance in the third book, I really didn't care for that third book, and it was so disappointing. Another bookish ick that I have, that I think a lot of people have, is the miscommunication trope. Now, there are books that have this trope, this dynamic in it, and I still end up really liking the story as a whole because other factors help balance that like frustration. For example, from the same author, I love Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. It's one of my favorite books from, I think 2022. I absolutely loved it. I've read it like 4 or 5 times. I just enjoy that book so much, but there is a heavy presence of the miscommunication trope, where if these 2 characters were just to like sit down and have an honest adult conversation, like the plot would have been resolved 80 pages sooner. But also from Abby Jimenez, the Friend Zone book, the miscommunication trope in that story drove me crazy, and there wasn't enough other things that I liked about it to outweigh that frustration. And I think I ended up giving that book like 2.5 stars, maybe a 3 stars. I also had a couple other issues with that book. Both books have the miscommunication trope, and I loved Part of Your World, and I really didn't love The Friend Zone. Another quintessential author who uses miscommunication a lot is Emily Henry. I feel like I read Happy Place and I was really disappointed, and I was really irritated by the miscommunication between the two main characters. And yet in People We Meet on Vacation, I thought it added to the angst and tension of the story in a really complimentary way. So even within this trope, there's times that I really like it and there's times that I really don't. The miscommunication trope is not always a miss for me, but it can be if it's dominating too much in a story. Another bookish ick that I have is when dirty talk is like too explicit or like too vulgar to the point where it doesn't really feel realistic. Don't get me wrong, like a little bit of dirty talk can be tasteful, it can be sexy, it can be consensual. Like there are a lot of beautiful things about, you know, some sexy dirty talk. However, in my mind, there's kind of this threshold where once it gets like just too explicit, it stops feeling realistic to me. In my mind, I catch myself stepping out of the scene and being like, would people really say this to each other? Like, would this couple really be doing that? A book that comes to mind where I just didn't like the dirty talk, it just made me cringe kind of, was Her Soul to Take by Harley LaRue. It just was too over the top. It didn't work for me. Yeah, it wasn't great. Another bookish ick that I have is when a story centers not a niche community necessarily, but like a specific community. And like you can tell that the author is not part of that community or just did not do sufficient research into that. I know that I have read books with this, but I had a hard time coming up with them as I was preparing for this video. But then I had a conversation with my sister a while back, and I remembered her telling me about this book called Catch and Cradle by Katie Rose, maybe. And this book follows these characters who are playing lacrosse in college, like at a collegiate level. And I remember her telling me that it was so obvious that like the author doesn't play lacrosse or didn't do enough research, because she was telling me that these college athletes were like doing drills that you would do when you were just learning. And both her and I played lacrosse growing up and played at pretty high levels. And so she was saying that it was just driving her nuts, because she was like, no college team would be running these drills. And I just remember us laughing about it. And so, yeah, like those kinds of examples just drive me nuts, where I'm like, you did not do your homework, author, about what this community, what this group of people like think, feel, and actually do. All right, the last bookish ick that I'm gonna talk about in this video is bad mental health or therapy representation. I work in the mental health field, and so it's very near and dear to my heart and my day-to-day life. My mother also works in the mental health profession, and so I really struggle when I see authors write characters or just like situations that really poorly represent like what therapy is, or, you know, they portray very stereotypical, sometimes false representations of a mental health diagnosis. It just like, that really bothers me. One author that notoriously has really shitty therapy, but also like social emotional representation in their books is Devney Perry. I think every single book of hers that I've read, there was some instance where either characters are repressing their feelings because like that's what makes them strong, because knowing how you feel is a weakness. And it's not like this book was written 30 years ago. So I don't know. And I think there's one installment in, oh my God, that one series of hers. I'm brain farting. I'll put some of the books on the screen, of course. But I think in that exact book, they're like talking shit about how stupid therapy is, or like how ineffective it is. And I just, yeah, I don't appreciate that. Another book that I remember the therapy representation like being really awful was in Ruthless Creatures by J.T. Gessinger or something like that. Let me see if I can find the specific thing that came up with that book. I didn't write anything specific, but I think the main character is just like constantly shitting on therapy. And I just remember being like, have you ever been to therapy? Have you ever found a therapist who's just right for you? It feels like you've not. So I don't appreciate that. Another example of like really horrible therapy representation is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. Now, I loved this book. This thriller was so fun. It was so dramatic. It was such a page turner, but I don't want anyone to think that there is anything realistic about that representation. There are so many ethical violations going on there. It is out of this world. Now, counter to that, a book I read recently that had fantastic therapy representation was Bloom Where You're Planted by Darby Bayham. It was such a breath of fresh air. It was so well done and just so accurate about like what a therapeutic conversation like between patient and the therapist could look like. Yeah, it was great. But yeah, so I feel like mental health therapy is like a big bookish ick when I feel like something is not being represented in an honest and genuine way. There you go. There are some of my current bookish icks. I know that this is not a comprehensive list of bookish icks that I have, let alone ones that I know other people have. So I'd be so curious to hear in the comments what bookish icks you've got. Do we have any of the same ones? Do you feel really differently? I would love to know. That's all we got for today. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to support my channel, go ahead, like, subscribe, do all the things. It really helps my channel. I'm getting close to 1,000 subscribers, which is a very exciting milestone. So if you made it this far, go ahead and leave the barf emoji. I find that emoji so funny. And I wore green on purpose so I could be like disgust from Inside Out. So all that to say, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Happy reading, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye.